I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. Welcome back. Did you miss me? For this week's episode, we are hitting the haunted trail once again as we continue north along the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. For any new lurkers or lurkers who may have completely forgotten what this was, a haunted trail is a collection of stories from along the Appalachian Trail that runs from Georgia to Maine, traveling through 14 states that includes Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Those people who choose to hike the entire length of the trail all at one time are known as through hikers. And since most through hikers typically travel south to north, that's how we're also going through these stories. We've covered 10 of the 14 states so far, so make sure you go back and listen to the others if you haven't already. They do not need to be listened to in order. Each state stands on its own. Some people like to listen in order. It's all up to you. I have personally hiked all of Maryland and West Virginia and sections in southern Pennsylvania from the Maryland line to about Pine Grove Furnace State Park. I've also hiked a small section in the Grayson Highlands of Virginia. And I want to mention the devastation of Hurricane Helene back in September. It seems like a really long time ago. This hurricane affected areas in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. The Appalachian Trail was severely affected as well by the storm, since it runs through the very areas that were hit. From about Virginia to Georgia, the trail and trail towns have been impacted. Help where and when you can, and if you can. Even if it's just to send prayers, good thoughts, juju, whatever it is that you believe in, positive, that would be appreciated. And now we're going to get back to the business of the paranormal. We're hitting the trail tonight in the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts has 90.2 miles of the Appalachian Trail that travels through the Berkshire region of the state. The trail there is rated from easy to challenging. It's also home to Mount Greylock, which I personally think sounds like some magical lair of some sort of Dumbledorian warlock. In reality, it was said to have been the inspiration behind Herman Melville's novel, Moby Dick. Mount Greylock is a better name than, like, Dick Mountain. I don't know. Probably should take that out. Before you get a puzzled look on your face about how a mountain inspired a story about a whale, apparently the view of Mount Greylock from Melville's window looked like the back of a whale, especially in the winter. And that's basically what inspired Melville to think of Moby Dick, the great white whale. So let's get on with the show. First up is the area of Great Barrington. In 2009, Great Barrington was named an Appalachian Trail community. It's located in the valley of the Housatonic River, and to the east of the river are the Berkshire Mountains. The Appalachian Trail runs through the southwest corner of the town. Within the town is a stately home known as Kellogg Terrace. It's actually known by several names: Kellogg Terrace, Barrington House, and Cyril's Castle. It was built by Mary Sherwood Hopkins, who was a widow with a sizable fortune. Her late husband, Mark Hopkins, made his fortune in the railroad business, and when he died, he left her with an inheritance around 20 to 40 million, which is the equivalent of 631 million, almost 1.3 billion today. She was called the richest widow in America. Back when Mary Hopkins was still out in San Francisco, she hired a man by the name of Edward Searles as an interior designer for her home there. About 9 years after the death of her husband, Mary Hopkins married Edward Searles. She was 68 and he was 46. I'm pretty sure he wasn't in it for love, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that I am. That same year, Hopkins began building a summer cottage in Great Barrington, an area that both she and her late husband had family ties to. Hopkins hired a premier architect to design the new house, gave final design approval to her new husband, Searles. Searles, of course, ended up replacing the architect with another who basically just did whatever Searles wanted. During construction, Searles included secret passageways and staircases into the design. It was rumored that he used the secret areas to carry on affairs with the chambermaids after his wife had become ill and bedridden. In fact, there is speculation that Edward Searles was slowly poisoning his wife. There were very few visitors allowed inside the mansion, and it's rumored that Searles would move heavy furniture around at night, making loud noises to scare his wife. Mary Hopkins eventually died from influenza in 1891, though it was thought she had actually been poisoned. The maid her husband had been having an affair with died mysteriously. There's another interesting part of the story. Searles, of course, inherited his wife's money when she died, though the will was contested by her adopted son, but he didn't win his lawsuit. Then, when Searles died, he left his estate to Arthur Walker, who was an employee of Searles and identified as a friend in the will. Searles' nephew contested the will, claiming he was not of sound mind and he had proof. Searles had dubbed himself Lord Methuen, hired dozens of laborers to dress as his court, to bow and address him as Your Lordship. Methuen was Mr. Searles' birthplace. The stories multiplied. Searles had built a mausoleum for his wife and transferred her coffin into it in a midnight processional with paid laborers enacting a royal burial. There were also remarks that, quote, his tastes and interests were those of a woman, insinuating that Searles was gay, something that at that time was considered a mental illness. No matter what the story was, it said that both Mary Hopkins and the servant that Searles was rumored to have had an affair with are both haunting the estate. Another rumor says that in the 1970s, a boy was exploring the tunnels at Barrington House that led from the pond to the basement. There was a cave-in, and the boy was killed. The tunnel was subsequently cemented closed. His ghost also haunts the grounds. Witnesses claim to have heard thumping noises coming from the wall, as well as disembodied voices. There have been strange breezes passing by occupants of different rooms and flashing lights seen on the property. Another story from the Great Barrington area surrounds a weather prophet. Levi Beebe was born in 1817. After health issues forced him to give up learning the paper business, he bought 2,000 acres on Beartown Mountain, where he ran a sawmill and studied the weather. After health issues forced him to give up learning the paper business, he bought 2,000 acres on Beartown Mountain, where he ran a sawmill and studied the weather. He became a legend in weather forecasting, and farmers began to plan their crops around his predictions. He didn't have any fancy equipment, just his observations and notes, and he referred to Mount Greylock as his barometer. He famously predicted the 1888 blizzard that became known as the Great White Hurricane. Nearly 400 people died in that storm, and the drifts were 10 to 30 feet high. The Berkshires weathered the storm well, mainly due to Beebe's predictions. Today, the ghost of this uncanny weather prophet is said to haunt the area around his mountain, perhaps still watching Mount Greylock and waiting for the next big storm. Next, we head into the October Mountain State Forest. The name October Mountain is said to have come from Herman Melville. The October Mountain State Forest encompasses 11,000 acres between Washington, Lenox, Lee, and Beckett. In 1983, 4 men were having a cookout at night at an old Boy Scout campground. They began hearing strange noises coming from the woods, and 2 of them decided to investigate. As they walked down the trail, they saw a humanoid creature ahead of them. They headed back to their group and decided to call it a night. As the group was leaving, the headlights of the car caught a creature standing on 2 legs, about 6 to 7 feet tall. It was covered in dark brown hair and had strange glowing eyes. The creature quickly disappeared as one of the men tried to approach it. They returned to the same area in daylight and again caught a glimpse of the creature. It moved very fast, and they could see its long arms swinging as it moved through the brush. There was a similar sighting that had been reported by a hiker. The hiker saw something large moving in the brush that was extremely tall and standing on 2 legs. It was covered all over with reddish hair and had very long arms. Its head was unusual in that it was pointed and it had a human-like face. The creature was carefully stacking rocks when the hiker saw it. The hiker was so terrified at what they had witnessed that they took off. There have been other reports of what is called the Wild Man, a couple that heard strange knocking sounds coming from the woods near their property, so they went outside and shined a light towards the trees. In the light, they saw 2 red glowing eyes that were about 7 to 8 feet above the ground. The knocking happens often, and sometimes the creature will answer knocks made by homeowners. Back when the Boy Scout camp was still operational, sometime in the 1970s, a scout reported seeing strange lights in the sky. He said there were 2 lights hovering and concentrating in one specific area. There was no noise at all, and the object shot straight up at a fast speed and disappeared. Leaving October Mountain State Forest, you hike near the town of Pittsfield. Known for its historical charm, Pittsfield is also home to a few haunted locations. The Bridge Lunch Diner at 220 North Street was located above the railroad tracks beside the Eagle Street Bridge. The diner was first opened by John Jack O'Loughlin, who was a conductor on the old Pittsfield-Dalton trolley line. In February 1958, the diner owner and customers watched as a steam locomotive barreled down the tracks at a high rate of speed. It was headed east, and the train could be seen in detail. The engine pulled a baggage car and 5 to 6 passenger cars. The sighting was reported to officials, but the officials pointed out that no steam engines operated on that line anymore. About a month later, in March, the locomotive was seen again, this time at 6:30 a.m., and was seen by the employees and breakfast diners. It's believed to be the ghost train from the Boston and Albany disaster that occurred in 1893. The train wreck known as the Chester train wreck occurred on August 31st, 1893, outside of Chester, Massachusetts. A bridge collapse plunged 4 train cars into the Westfield River, killing 14 people. Sadly, the Bridge Lunch Diner was torn down in 1982 to make room for Sotail Park and a railroad underpass. That ghost train is still traveling through. Also in Pittsfield is the Berkshire Athenaeum, which is Pittsfield's public library. In the area of the library, people have reported seeing a scantily clad woman running around hysterically during the early morning hours. Not a live woman, in case you're wondering. The woman's thought to be the ghost of a prostitute. Some claim that there was a brothel operated at the site of the library, though I was unable to find any information backing up that claim. Inside the library is the crane room, said to be haunted by the ghost of Colonel Elijah Crane, whose presence is felt through strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. The area that is now the town common in Pittsfield was once a POW camp during the War of 1812. During the war, British troops were kept there, and when they died, they were buried right there on site. And there have been other burials in the area since the war. This, of course, gave way to grave robbers. The medical schools in the area did not have enough cadavers for their students to use, so it became the students' responsibility to acquire their own cadavers, much like purchasing school supplies. It kind of makes me chuckle. I don't think Walmart sells cadavers. There's a really bad joke there. Let's move on. Now, in that area, you sometimes see British soldiers walking around or hear the eerie noise of shovels against dirt. Next up is Dalton, Massachusetts. Dalton is a transition town between the urban and rural portions of Berkshire County. It's part of the Pittsfield, Massachusetts Metropolitan Statistical Area. Within this area is a place called Wizard's Glen. Wizard's Glen in the Berkshires is a depression between two deep-sided hills. Gorge is filled with rugged, jumbled rocks and was a sacred Native American haunt for shamans. It was considered a place of power, and rituals were conducted here to communicate with the spirits. There was an altar made of rock and stained with blood called the Devil's Altar, where it said human sacrifices were made to appease Hobomok, the spirit of evil. There was once a man by the name of Josh Chamberlain who was out hunting when a large storm blew in. He hid amongst the rocks to wait out the storm when he saw what he called the devil appear. It was a creature with cloven feet and tail and wings around its head. The thing leaped upon the altar with fresh scalps dangling from its waist. It spoke a brief incantation, summoning shadow hordes that came with torches and encircled the altar. They began chanting until a Native American girl was placed on the altar. The shadow horde rushed in with weapons. The girl screamed once, and Hobomok raised his axe, and the entire horde crowded in to drink the blood. Seeing the girl's face, the hunter grabbed his Bible, held it toward the devils, and cried out the name of God. There was a crash of thunder. The light faded, and the demons vanished. The Appalachian Trail crosses Gulf Road near the Glen, just east of there. There's also a legend about treasure in the Dalton area. When the Hessian troops began their march to Boston, they feared attack from local farmers who were trying to steal what money they had left. Upon reaching Dalton, the Hessians decided to place all of their valuables inside a howitzer cannon and bury it with the plan to retrieve it after the war. They went and buried it in the nearby woods. For many years after, local residents kept a watchful eye on any strangers who came into town, and they followed anyone who went into the woods. But no treasure was ever recovered, and it still might be there today. Just a few miles from Dalton, in a town called Windsor, is a former summer camp called Camp Wendigo that has been closed since the 1980s. It's said to be haunted by 6 girls and a crazy woman. And the story is that a counselor went crazy and killed 6 girls. 3 were hung in the barn, and 3 were drowned in a tub, and then the counselor killed herself. This tale seems to run more to the fantastic, and is sure to be a made-up tale told to frighten campers. However, there are apparitions seen around the old camp. There are mysterious shadows and child-sized handprints on the windows, and there have been reports of the sounds of children crying. While there is no evidence of crazed, murderous camp counselors in the 1970 to 1980s, 3 young girls were abducted from the area and murdered. 1 body was found near the camp. There's a strong presence in the basement of the camp, and a figure of a man in overalls and a young girl in a dress is seen. Not to mention the fact the camp is named for a Native American legend of a cannibalistic creature. Not the best thing to call a camp for kids. Just saying. Next up is Mount Greylock itself. Wikipedia says Mount Greylock is the highest point in Massachusetts at 3,489 feet. Located in northwest region of the state, it is part of the Taconic Mountains, a geologically distinct range from the nearby Berkshires and Green Mountains. Expansive views and a small area of subalpine forest characterize its upper reaches. Mount Greylock is named for Chief Greylock. Born around 1660 as a member of the Warnoke tribe, Chief Greylock became a legend. As a young man, he was a fur trapper, and he lost part of his foot in a bear trap. He had a secret cave on Mount Greylock, and from there he would harass the British as they settled the area. At the age of 63, he was still spry enough to plan and carry out guerrilla attacks on the English troops in Northfield, Massachusetts, and Rutland, Vermont, in a conflict known as Dummer's War. The governor of Massachusetts sent troops to capture Greylock, but they failed. He died a free man in 1750. In 1901, a landslide on the eastern slope of Mount Greylock occurred. When it was all said and done, the slide covered 1,500 feet in length. It was known as the Chief's Staircase. In 1990, 4 days of torrential rain created another small slide in the area of the first, and this time a giant face appeared in the rubble. People said it was a sign that Chief Greylock was watching over the mountain and his secret cave. It isn't only the vision of the chief that guards the mountain. Some have seen his ghost there as well. The apparition walks the woods with a telltale limp, guarding his mountain home. There's also the legend of the Money Hole. Never mind. The Money Hole, or what is also called the Heart of Greylock, is a crater-like recess 1,000 feet deep somewhere on the mountain. Legend tells of a gang of counterfeiters who set up shop in the recess in Revolutionary War times. Some believe there may still be coins in the recess. And that's not all that's been left behind. The ghosts of the long-dead counterfeiters are said to be haunting the area, keeping watch over it. There have been reports of strange sounds and apparitions. Not far off the Appalachian Trail is the Bellows Pipe Trail, which is home of the Old Coot. William Saunders joined the Union Army in 1861. During the war, his wife received word that William had been badly injured during battle. Hearing nothing more after that, she ended up remarrying. In 1865, William Saunders returned and discovered another man in his home. He left and built a small shack on Mount Greylock and became a hermit the locals called the Old Coot. Hunters found his body one winter and claimed to see his spirit fly up from his body. His ghost has since been seen heading up the mountain. There was a photograph of the ghost that appeared in a newspaper. It was a blurry dark shape against a wooded background. One of the last towns in Massachusetts before leaving the state is the town of North Adams. In North Adams is the Houghton Mansion. The Houghton Mansion is haunted by the spirits of Albert Houghton, his daughter Mary, and chauffeur John Witters. The mansion was home to the first mayor of North Adams, Albert Houghton. There are 4 deaths associated with the mansion, all occurring within 11 days of each other. On August 1, 1914, the chauffeur was driving Albert, Mary, and a family friend named Sybil to Vermont. They suddenly came upon a road crew on a mountain road. The chauffeur swerved to avoid a collision, hit a soft spot, and rolled down an embankment. Sybil died at the scene, and Mary died on the way to the hospital. The chauffeur, John Witters, was found dead in the barn behind the mansion. He had shot himself with a pistol. Mayor Houghton died 9 days later. Now people hear female voices in the mansion. There are walking and running footsteps and knocking on the walls. Some people have even reported cold spots. Doors slam shut on their own, and lights turn on and off without being touched. There are also shadow figures seen in the mansion, along with the overwhelming feelings of sadness associated with Mary's room. A little girl has been seen in the basement, though she has no known relation to the mansion. There was another house on the property prior to the mansion being built. The mansion was built over the old site, with the original basement being left intact, so perhaps the little girl is from the time before. Also in the area of North Adams is the Hoosick Tunnel. Work on the Hoosick Railroad Tunnel began in 1851, and it was finished in 1875. In that time span, 200 men lost their lives. The tunnel is often referred to as the Bloody Pit. Most of the deaths were the result of explosions, fire, and drownings. One death, however, might not have been accidental. On March 20th, 1865, 3 explosive experts, Ned Brinkman, Billy Nash, and Ringo Kelly, planted a charge and ran toward the bunker. Kelly set off the charge early, killing both Brinkman and Nash. Kelly disappeared immediately after. On March 30th, 1866, Kelly's body was found in the exact spot where his co-workers had died. He had been strangled. The murder was never solved, and everyone believed he was killed by the spirits of Brinkman and Nash. In 1868, the workers began hearing strange noises and the sound of a man's voice crying out in agony. They refused to enter the tunnel at night. In October of 1868, 13 miners died in a gas explosion when the shaft began filling with water. During the time the miners were missing, villagers told tales of vague shapes and muffled wails near the water-filled pit. A worker claimed to see the lost miners carrying picks and shovels through the shroud of mist and snow at the top of the mountain. The apparitions would appear briefly, then vanish, leaving no footprints. In October 1874, a local hunter vanished. 3 days later, he was found stumbling along Deerfield River in shock. He said a voice ordered him to the tunnel. Once there, he saw ghostly figures wandering around. Something took his rifle and hit him in the head with it. Searchers never found his weapon. In 1875, a fire tender named Harlan Mulvaney was driving a load of firewood into the tunnel late at night. As he entered the tunnel, he suddenly turned his team around and raced out of the tunnel. A few days later, searchers found the wagon and horses 3 miles from the tunnel, but Mulvaney was never seen or heard from again. In October 1977, a worker was chipping ice from the track when he heard a voice say, "Run, Joe, run!" He looked up and saw a train coming down the tracks. No one else was there. About 6 weeks later, the same worker was using a crowbar to free freight cars that were stuck on an icy track. Again he heard a voice yell, "Drop it, Joe, drop it!" Startled, he dropped the bar, and it was instantly struck and smashed against the tunnel wall by 11,000 volts of electricity from a short-circuited overhead power line. Today there are still ghostly happenings at the tunnel. People have described getting an eerie feeling and feeling like someone is walking closely behind them. The entity sometimes taps people on the shoulder. Shrieking noises have been heard, and figures of people wearing old-fashioned clothing have been seen, along with the glowing white light and swaying lanterns. Some people have also heard strange, mournful sounds, like something suffering a great deal of pain. One witness saw what they thought was a workman walking towards him with a headlamp. As it drew closer, the figure took on a strange blue light and changed into the shape of a human being without a head. During an investigation of the tunnel, the investigators walked about 2 miles into the tunnel and heard a man groaning in pain. There was no one there. The region of the Berkshires in Massachusetts has also had its share of UFO sightings. In November 1951, Mr. and Mrs. Fenton of North Adams were among the people throughout western Massachusetts to report seeing green fireballs whizzing across the sky. Though some believed it was nothing more than meteor activity, the Fentons didn't think so. In 1960, a young UFO hunter working out of an X-Files style garage had already been contacted by a race of extraterrestrials. It was one of many contacts he supposedly had with aliens from the planet of Corindor that were documented in the now defunct magazine Flying Saucers International in numerous articles from 1961 to 1969. In addition to going on board the Corindian spacecraft, this GE electrical engineer also claimed to have been taken out into space and to hidden flying saucer bases underneath the Berkshire Hills. On October 1st, 1965, 4 witnesses reported seeing a bright sphere hovering. At one point, they said it hovered within 100 feet of them. It began climbing as it moved towards the mountain, then made an abrupt right-angle turn and vanished. On September 25, 1966, 3 reports came in to Pittsfield police about a strange object seen over the city that evening. Donald Nelligan said the circular object hovered over the area for about 5 minutes before heading off at a high rate of speed toward the southwest. In early 1967, an unidentified object first sighted over the Walter J. Coladza Airport plagued the western part of Great Barrington throughout the second week of March. Described as a round glowing white object, very large in size, it was reported flying at about horizon level by several Great Barrington residents. On April 14th, 2 North Adams youths reported a brightly lit, low-flying object moving towards Williamstown at a speed they estimated at near twice that of a jet aircraft. On November 20th, another mysterious round object was seen at various points throughout western Massachusetts and southern Vermont. It was dismissed by some as a meteor, but Mrs. Gigliotti of North Adams described something quite different. Circular mass of bright lights which came directly at her car, swooping up just in time to miss her. It then hovered directly above a tree she estimated to be between 50 and 70 feet tall, before taking off, leaving a glowing trail in its wake. Other witnesses in North Adams and in Stamford, Vermont, offered similar accounts, and police in Bellows Falls, Greenfield, and Springfield also received calls about a mystery object that night. Cylindrical objects would be reported in the late 90s to early 2000s, such as a brightly iridescent green cigar-shaped object, described by a driver on the westernmost end of the Massachusetts Turnpike in November of 2005. There was more talk in the media of a wave of UFO activity in the summer of 2011. WAMC Public Radio reported a spate of sightings concentrated in the first week of August. In the winter of early 2013, online reports to the primary 3 databases of UFO sightings in the Berkshires were approximately doubled their average level. According to 2 MUFON investigators in different areas of New England, there seemed to be a general consensus that sighting reports had been running high in western Massachusetts. In the summer of 2015, there was another wave of sightings similar in number to the reports from the 1960s and 70s. The 2020 Unsolved Mysteries episode highlighted a series of experiences from the Reed family. Tom and Matthew Reed claimed they were taken on board alien craft repeatedly between 1966 and 69. Though considered highly questionable due to Tom Reed's marketing and monetizing of his personal account, the Berkshire UFO sightings have become a household name. So if you're out and about hiking the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts, you should definitely take some time at night to look up at the sky. And with that, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, you can find Lurk on any of your favorite podcast platforms, and you can find us on the website, lurkpodcast.com. The website, if you have not heard yet, has been completely overhauled. We are fancy now. I couldn't think of the word fancy. Yeah, it's a fancy website. We have all of our episodes there. There is about information there. We have all social media links. We have started a new blog, so be sure to check that out. The blog is being used for whatever strikes my fancy at the moment. If there is a topic that isn't quite long enough for an actual full episode, but is interesting, that topic will be part of the blog. If you listeners have any ideas for the blog, let me know. Hit me up, lurkpodcast@yahoo.com. Also, on the website, you can sign up for the newsletter that we are going to launch here probably mid-February. I'm going to say the 15th. It may not come out for a couple days later because the 15th I actually will be camping with scouts. So we'll see. But mid-month, roughly, is the plan that I will be sending out a monthly newsletter, which will give you all kinds of various information. So go to the website. There is a spot on the website, I think it's at the bottom of the page on the left-hand side, where you can input your email address and click that you would like to be added to the newsletter email list, which is also called subscribing to the newsletter. Anyway, make sure you do that if you're interested. And until next time, keep lurking.